Good evening and welcome to tonight's discussion titled 2021 Vision for Building Stronger Communities. Before we get started, we want you to know that the comment section is being monitored. So if you have questions or comments throughout our discussion, please feel free to type them in. And if something is said that resonates with you, by all means, shoot your girl some hearts and likes. To test out our comment section, go ahead and let us know where you're watching from. And while you do that, I'll introduce myself. My name is Yvette Langham. I'm the host of Tweet Trends Podcast, and I'm also your host for tonight. This evening, the event is being brought to you by the Agents of Change, a diverse group of former high school classmates that have come together in an effort to initiate positive change in response to last year, the whole situation with civil unrest in the country. Tonight, we'll be talking to April England-Albright, the National Legal Director and Acting Chief of Staff of the organization Black Voters Matter. Welcome, April.
Hi. It's nice to be
Thank you
here.
for taking. Thank you. Thank you for coming. We appreciate you giving of your time to come and speak with us this evening. So to start off, if you don't mind, would you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what drew you to working with Black Voters Matter?
Well, I'm an attorney by trade, and I've been an attorney for 25 years, and licensed in Alabama, but the focus and vision of my work has generally been national. And so probably becoming a lawyer, and not just an attorney, but a civil rights attorney who works in the area of challenging the laws that impact the rights of people of color, Black folks, marginalized communities in this country, really was sourced from my father, right? Because I grew up in a household where this was his focus. I saw him, spend a lot of his time as an attorney doing this. And so I think my passion started there. And so when I began to practice law, I wanted to make sure. And in fact, when I started practicing in courts, I remember a lot of places I would go, they would hear my last name, England. They'd say, "Are you John England's daughter?" And I would be like, "Yeah," because I also practiced in a lot of the courts that he practiced in. But Black Voters Matter Fund is actually an organization that I was a part of conceiving. It is it's an outgrowth of work that myself and Latasha Brown and Cliff Albright is my husband, Latasha Brown is my best friend, and we've been doing this work for over 20 years. And so we say that this organization, Black Voters Matter Fund, is really a culmination of the work that we've done around community organizing, around building movements, around being a part of a lot of different organizations like the Malcolm X grassroots movement, and this intersection between movement and how we can utilize voting as a tool to bring about real change in our community. And so we see Black Voters Matter as a culmination of those two worlds coming together.
Awesome. Now, most people are familiar with the saying that necessity is the mother of invention. And so it's very obvious that there was a definite need for an organization like this. And so you said that your husband is one of the founders of the organization?
Yeah.
And so was it anything in particular that they saw that prompted them to start the organization?
Well, I will tell you, I think it's just really, when I say it's a culmination of work, what we have noticed for years is that, when people, particularly Black voters, when Black folks vote, we have always noticed that, either we're voting and we're not getting the results that we are trying to get in our communities, that, a lot of people in our community don't trust that voting will do anything, right? That it's not worth doing because there's not, a lot of, results that come from it. And so we've noticed that throughout the years. And we've also had experiences where voting was not impactful, right? And then there were things that occurred with voting that were just not right. And so I think that is really what caused us to say, let's create a vehicle to make it right. Let's create a vehicle, like Brother Malcolm said, where we can use it, we can be intelligent with the ballot, right? We can be purposeful and strategic with the ballot. Let's create that vehicle. And I think out of that desire came Black Voters Matter. Now, one of the first elections that Black Voters Matter participated in was the Doug Jones race in Alabama. And so, but of course, the organization was conceived before then and was actually a part of flipping a very small district in the state of Georgia first. But after that, engaging in Alabama to help Doug Jones get elected as senator in the state of Alabama, which, if you know Alabama, that's a hard feat to do. But by doing so, giving resources to organizations and groups that we've worked with for years in order to make that happen. And so I think that was one of the first things, the first races, electoral national races, a race that got national attention that we were involved in, and which, was the first time Black Voters Matter actually start being talked about on a national level as an organization.
Okay, so now there were 2 points that you brought up, and so I'm going to try to remember to get to both of them. But the first part, you mentioned about how people are a little apathetic about the idea that their vote counts. Mm-hmm. How do you have that conversation with someone to try to get them to understand that it actually does?
Well, the first thing I do is admit that it's that there's truth to that, right? When people tell you that voting has not changed their communities, that's truth to that. I lived in a community, Selma, Alabama, for at least 10 years. And if you've been to Selma, Alabama, and you've driven through, you will see that the community looks the same, right? If you've ever had the blessing to go to Selma, participate in the Jubilee that happens there every year, one of the things people always say would be, it looks just like it looked in 1965, right? When the Bloody Sunday actually happened. And so, but despite that, in a town that birthed the Voting Rights Act that all of us are now being privileged to use and empowered with, a lot of elections did not bring change to that community. So when I was a young woman and I would go door to door and I would tell people, this election is coming up, you need to go, you need to vote. They would say to me, why? Why do I need to vote? And then I would say, well, people died on the bridge, right down the street. People actually died and got beat up in order for you to be able to vote. And they would say, well, I haven't seen any result of that other than them getting beat. What else did we get, right? And so I had to wrestle with that, right? Because we had, at the time when we first moved to Selma, we didn't have a Black mayor, but over time you had a Black mayor, you had Black city council people, but yet the economic conditions in that community did not change. And so, so I raised that because what people are saying is elections are ritualistic, but yet they shouldn't be. They should be impactful and they should change communities. And so the first thing I do when someone says that to me is I get it, right? And I tell them, you're correct. But the only way we can change that, right, is if we change it. We can make it become something different if we organize ourselves, if we walk in the same direction, if we have an agenda to attach it to, right? So that we're not just going to polls and voting for individuals, we're going to polls in order that we have better criminal justice reform in our community. We have DAs that are going to be righteous in their prosecution and carrying out of laws in those communities. We're going to have judges, right, that are going to be fair and equitable while being merciful and following the law. We're going to have county commissions that are actually going to make sure that resources and infrastructure are built up equitably all around communities and not just one community. So my point being, we accept that it's true, and then we talk about attaching voting to real transformative change, to a real transformative agenda.
Awesome. That's that. I wish I could have written all of that down and just put it on a piece of paper and be like, here, this is what you need to see. This is what you need to know, because that spoke to every part of that. That's awesome. Now, the other point that you mentioned was about flipping, I think you said a district in in Georgia prior to the work that you did in
Mhm,
Alabama.
mhm, mhm,
And I
mhm,
know that just about everyone around the country, unless they were living under a rock, saw how the various groups in Georgia, like your own, came together and turned it from a red state to a blue, or I don't know, people are saying that it's purple. I'm not sure. I guess the jury is still out on that one. But for people like myself living in other states around the country, how do we go about duplicating that type of success? I mean, is there a potion, a formula? What is it
mhm.
that we can do to try to get that same or similar outcome?
There is, that's being asked a lot, right? But what most people, don't know is how long it took to happen, right? That this was work in Georgia had been occurring for over a 10-year period, right? Where groups had, began to do organizing, first dealing with the oppressive laws that were in the state, then engaging communities where they would literally go door to door and start getting people registered to vote, something that simple. Like, and not just the people. Uh,
Uh-oh.
can you?
I can. It sounds like
Yeah,
you,
it went, one of my ear pods went out. But
ah,
what I was saying was a culmination of years, a culmination of many organizations working together, and then going door to door, and then going locally, hyper locally into communities and winning smaller races at a time, right? Building up the momentum and where people could see and visualize that together we could attack, obtain elected positions, and we could also change our communities. We would have wins. But it takes time for people to do it, and absolutely, it can be done in many places, right? But it does take work. And one of the things we don't, it takes a lot of work and effort and coming together, not just in municipal areas where there are a lot of Black folks, like people in Georgia just look at Georgia and Atlanta, right? Not realizing that even outside of Atlanta, there are pockets of rural communities where Black folks live that are often ignored, not only from policy perspective, but also from the power analysis in terms of how can we grow power in our state to bring change. And so no voter was ignored, right? So yes, there was organizing that happened in Atlanta, but there was also organizing happening in Augusta, that was happening in Columbus and Savannah, in Valdosta, Georgia, in Albany, Georgia, in all these little communities where you had significant numbers of Black folks who lived there. And so as these movements began to happen, starting in Atlanta, going into the rural areas, having a candidate, right, that is righteous, that can pull people to see the vision that they have for their community. And so Atlanta and Georgia was blessed with Stacey Abrams. And so, but it's not just because she was someone who they saw themselves in, but it was also because she was a part of doing that 10-year work, creating organizations to make sure that Black infrastructure was developed and not ignored. And so it takes time, but it is absolutely possible if we begin to see that urban and rural communities together can create a power base, when we can see that having candidates who really represent and come from the community and really talk about issues that matter to Black folks, because that's important, right? Not just anybody trying to just get office, but we now need a crop of Black folks who are going to run from office, that come from the community, that are talking about issues like police brutality and how we change that, and do it so courageously. And we need candidates who are going to talk about food insecurity and lack of infrastructure in our communities, but not just talk about it, right? And just use the buzzwords, but demonstrate that they have worked to create self-determining models in communities to make these things a reality. So all of those things create a perfect storm: hard work, bringing more people into the fold, getting behind groups who are doing felony disenfranchisement work, that are bringing even those brothers and sisters back into the fold to vote, creating and raising up a whole electorate, and then finding allies, right? Finding allies in communities that are in alignment with the agenda that we are creating for ourselves, and whatever that may be, from topics such as police brutality, but yes, even reparations, right? We got to have allies in these states that are in alignment with that we can join, and we can say, as we pursue reparations, as we pursue the end of police brutality, we will help you deal with the issues that are important to your community, right? And together, all of those things become a prescriptive formula for how we can create wins statewide, and therefore change the policies of some of the reddest states, in this country. That was a long answer, but it was long because it's a process, but we've got to be willing as a community to make that investment.
Oh, it was definitely needed, because I know that I've talked to a number of people, and they seem ready. They want to do something. They ready to go, but then they look at it really closely. Then they realize, like, but I'm busy. I got stuff to do. I got kids. I got work. And all these things tend to come into play. That it's like, okay, so were you really serious to start with, or did it just sound good? It felt good to say that. So now, with what you just mentioned, though, you mentioned having the candidates, and I can imagine that's probably it could be a long journey to actually raise up a good candidate, because they may or may not be there. So you have to kind of create a candidate in somebody coming up in the community.
Well, I think that, the problem is, being a candidate is business, right? And so there is this quote unquote prototype of what a candidate would be. And so when that prototype is created, then you have the general electoral infrastructure, like parties, right? And other organizations that breed a certain prototype repeatedly. And so when we talk about building out, and creating a new crop of candidates, we first have to dispel the prototype of what a candidate has to be, right? And we have to remember that the best prototype are people who actually come from the community in which they're running. And I'm not talking about a residency, because we can all meet resident, right? We can just move, live somewhere for a couple of weeks, and then we could run for office and say we qualify. That's not what I'm talking about. We need people who actually live from the community, are impacted by the policies, and maybe have been impacted directly themselves. For example, I went through many years when we didn't have health insurance. So I absolutely understood, right, the need to fight to have health insurance for everyone that was affordable. And so we need to, first of all, dispel this prototype of what is a perfect candidate anyway. And we need to begin, because if you look around in your churches, in your civic organization, there's a sister or a brother who always showing up, right? But they're not running for office. Why is that? Why are they not running to office, but they're providing more resource and more guidance and more emergency care than the person who's actually in office? Those are the folks I'm talking about, right? We have to pull those individuals into the fold, and we don't just pull them in. We got to find ways to financially support them. Because when you run for office, oftentimes you are going against the establishment, and it makes it hard for good folk with goodwill and good purpose and good service, a servant's heart, to run. So that's one of the things we do at Black Voters Matter, right? Is we know these candidates, we know these folks. We look for these people that are living in communities that are already doing the work, right? And we help propel them to leadership, whether it's by giving them support to run as a candidate, to bring those changes, or, I'll give you an example, even in Alabama, a couple of years ago, in a community of Uniontown and I believe it was Uniontown. Was that Uniontown there? Uniontown, Alabama, there's an issue of environmental justice issue with coal ash that was impacting that community. And so for the first time, people who were organizing around ending that kind of environmental justice said, we're going to run. And we said, we're going to support you. And so we got behind that candidate, even though this person had never run before, right? Helped him have the resources to match the other candidates who were supporting the corporations that were creating the coal ash, right? And he won. He won.
Oh.
So you got to give them resources and time to help those kind of candidates make it into office, because they will carry the heart, of the people. And the flip side of that, not only will they carry forth the heart of the people, but when you come from the people can hold you accountable in a different kind of way, right? It's hard to hold someone accountable when they are elected by special interest groups and other types of resources. So when you bring somebody from the community up and into these spaces, what you find is that it's easier to hold those folk accountable to the things that are dear, to that community.
Right. So now that you've given us an idea of the type and time that goes into organizing and launching this type of effort, and then even building up and supporting a candidate, and then so we take all those pieces and we say, all right, we're ready. It's time to do this. And then we look into the community and see where the issues are. And one of the things that's been brought up is the fact that because voting is such an integral part of this whole equation, and knowing how Black and Brown people tend to be disproportionately affected by the penal system, restoring voting rights seems to be another hurdle that we have to try to find some way to overcome. So what is that process like?
Well, right now we need for the House and the Senate to pass and restore the very important provisions of the Voting Rights Act that was removed via the Shelby versus Holder case that was birthed out of Alabama, that ripped out of it Section 5, which is the pre-clearance provision of the act. And right now, both with having a Democratic House and having a slight and small majority in the Senate, we need them to pass this provision, and we need them to do it now. It is just as vital as passing COVID relief. How do we know? Right now, in most of these states, particularly Georgia, they are passing regressive laws to, again, make voting out of reach for Black folks and other marginalized communities, Brown, Indigenous, Asian Pacific, because in Georgia, they knew that it was these communities that made the difference in the outcome in Georgia, in the presidential race as well as the Senate race. And so right now they are in session passing these bills to make voting harder. And so it's not just in Georgia, it is everywhere, particularly those states, for example, like Georgia, like Michigan, like Pennsylvania, like Wisconsin, like Arizona, all of these places where they saw marginalized communities making an impact, they are now passing the laws to make it harder. So my point being, they have to pass this right now, right? Because with that passing of that act, what it means is the Department of Justice, and any time a state will make a change to a voting that impacts voting, they will have to have that pre-cleared by the Department of Justice before it can go into effect, right? And so when that was undone via the Shelby v. Holder decision, most of these states, particularly the red states, went to work. And as one court described in North Carolina, they started creating provisions that with surgical precision targeted Black folks to make it hard for Black people to vote, closing polls, right? Making sure that Black polling precincts do not have the same kind of infrastructure, such as sufficient amount of polling machines, things of that nature, making it hard by removing, thousands of voters before elections, under the guise that these individuals don't vote, or they're not voting, or they're not valid voters, and doing it unchecked. Because again, the Department of Justice is no longer having to evaluate those things. So we need for the Democratic Party to prioritize this issue. And while they have the majority, which was gifted to them by Black and other marginalized, let's be clear, right? Because that was a part of one of our agenda items as a community, that you go into office and you create mechanisms that protect our community. And that's one of them. So we need them to do that. And so, anybody listening, you need to be pulling on your representative to make this a priority. In the same way that they're making immigration a priority, which they should, because we cannot be a community that stands by and watches any young person, be housed in cages and ripped from their families and treated inhumanely. But we also don't want to be treated inhumanely too. So we need these measures passed. We need the George Floyd Act passed, where we're talking about real national laws that are going to speak to the type of terror that is happening on our community right now. So, our job isn't done. We got these victories, but now we have to fight to defend them and make them do what we wanted them to do by voting for them. And that's what Malcolm means, being strategic, right, when we use the ballot.
Right. So now you mentioned the George Floyd Act. What was the initial act that you mentioned, just to kind of put it back out there?
It was it's been called the John Lewis Act after John Lewis, of course, who passed last year, but was the representative from Atlanta, from Georgia, who participated in Bloody Sunday as a young man, and his face was, of course, the image that everyone sees of the young man being beat. Leading was one of the ones in the front of the march that was beaten. The act is actually named in his honor. It's called the John Lewis Act. It was passed in Congress from the House. Senate need to do something with it. The George Floyd Act, Police Reform Act, was also passed. And again, these are not totally all what we need. These are reparative, these are harm reduction bills. There are other things that we need, them to do as well. But those are two important bills that are directly related to the needs that we have in our community.
Okay, so it looks like someone in our audience is trying to jog your memory of some others. They want to know if you can give more information about the specific bills that we need to have, that we need to get passed. So we've got, go ahead.
Well, those are two specific bills that deal directly with issues that impact, Black people. But of course, there are other bills as well. When we talk about, we're talking about wages, right? And whether or not they're going to increase the wage, and if they're going to do it through the reconciliation process, or if they're going to have to go back and then create an entirely new bill to support it. Either way, we've got to have it, right? We have got to increase the amount of income and wages that are coming to our community, because as usual, when it comes to wages in this country, we as Black people are always disproportionately impacted, right, by that. So we need to be a part of supporting the increase of the livable wage to a higher rate of $15. But we need to go further than that. And we've been talking about reparations in this country for a very, very long time, right? And it's not a subject that, folks want to talk about. And you don't hear about it being suggested in any kind of bill, except there is a bill to commission a study to examine and evaluate, what, if any, type of reparations Black people in this country would be entitled to. And so we have to, in our communities, push this issue of reparations, because, when you talk about other bills that could help us, they tend to be, quote unquote, Band-Aids, right? They are harm reduction. But if we start talking about more as a community, issues like reparations and what reparations would look like in this country, then we can begin to talk about the things that can restore, our community. We can begin to rebuild our community, And so I do want to make sure that before we go down a laundry list of what potential bills may benefit us and what we would support, we have to have a vision of where we're trying to go. And we're trying to go beyond, right, just doing things to make sure that we're okay. We're trying to gain power, in our community. So we believe that, reparations is but one of those means to do so.
Perfect, perfect. So we can't necessarily go down a laundry list tonight of all the things that should and should not be passed, but that's the start of knowing where we want to go in order to figure out what what things we need to be on our senators about and our congressmen and representatives. So now, with reparations, it kind of took my mind to voting and economics and how that impacts the community. Have you all done any type of work or research in that area?
Well, we are very big into trying to find ways to build out, economic power, in our communities. We support cooperative examples. We support, obviously, when we try to engage and do programmatic things in our community, we try to use our people. Like for example, in December, we tried our best to use, Black farmers to help provide food, for people in our community during times of need. And we also are a part of a commission in the Southeast that's trying to find ways to build out economic growth, build out our farming infrastructure, and create a circular process that not only are we able to grow and, harvest and then can and then, distribute, but that it's going back into our communities. We're trying to find natural resources that are within the Black community itself, trying to find new opportunities such as solar, technology, that our community can find themselves a part of, and businesses to grow into all these new different industries that are out there. Part of our capacity building efforts in our C3 organization is designed to, one, find those opportunities, and then two, create, groups and consensus and collaborative, organizations so that we can build those things out. We have to do that, and we can't always rely, on the United States government or state governments to help us do that. We have to find ways as a community ourselves, to build out our own infrastructure. And that's kind of why when we talk about reparations and making it a topic in this country, is because we are old, right? And, getting the resources that we need, that we should have been able to keep, post Reconstruction, but was not defended by the federal government. So many of us lost land and lost those things. That has hurt us economically. So, that's why I was saying it's so important that we begin to demand reparations, but that not only we demand it, but that we have clear asks of the reparations, because through that mechanism, a lot of the things that we're trying to do with economic empowerment and building out an infrastructure in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities, can absolutely happen. We would have the resources to do so. So yes, we do support. Part of our work is building out and helping to build out economic, infrastructure. But there are just other things that we can do to try to make that happen and make it easier for folks.
Right. Looks like we have another question from the audience. This one is from Adrienne Simpson Brown. She wants to know, how do we keep the public engaged and avoid complacency to ensure progress continues?
Well, we can't stop now. People are looking at voting as the premier act, right, of activism, and it's not, right? In this country, most of the gains of Black folks have not come via voting. Most of the gains that we gained, including the Voting Rights Act itself, came from us organizing in a sustained way, right? And so with that in mind, we have to look at the lessons that history has taught us. We have to remember that the Montgomery Boycott Act, for example, was over a year of sustained action in that community to create that result. So protesting, right, and other avenues like that are still viable options for us in between voting. And so we don't need to just wait for voting to occur in order for us to express our political will and power, And so the other thing is we have to become very comfortable as a community with power, right? There are different forms of power. There's explosive power that comes in the form of doing a protest, but there's also, silent power, tantamount to water dripping out of a faucet that can over time crack concrete, right? And so we have to be able as a community to express all of those ranges of power. And so in between voting, we have to begin to support our businesses, right? We have to be a part of movements and organizations that are constantly thinking about how can we improve our communities, right? Because that's a day-to-day work where you come together in your town, that you go to your city council meetings, that you go to your county commissioner meetings, that you go to meetings outside of those meetings with you and your neighbors, and you develop how do we want to change our community to make it better? And you create an agenda, and you begin to use these meetings and opportunities to build out that agenda, right? There's so much we can do together, but we must organize ourselves, because without that, it's even difficult for voting to matter, because that same group of people who are organizing and going to meetings, who are meeting and creating agendas about what their community needs, and then engaging those officials and other folks about how to bring the change, when it's time to vote, they're going to come back because they're constantly engaging in community efforts. Now, everybody can't do that, right? It's not. I mean, it takes a lot to be able to vote. It takes a lot to be able to engage. So we have to have an expectation that we are all ambassadors, that we have to realize that not all of our brothers and sisters can come to these city council meetings, but ain't no need in shaming them, right? We need to make sure that even if their lifestyle of living in a country like America, where there's so few who are rich and so many who are struggling, that while they're working and making sure that they can take care of their family, that those of us who can will go. We'll go in these spaces. But not only will we go in these spaces, we'll come out and then we'll make sure that we're still going door to door to let them know what's going on. And we'll still call them to let our community know what's going on. Because those kind of things only happen when somebody is when it's election time. And so we're trying to shift the narrative and say, no, those types of things, issues, and the need for us to organize around issues go on all the time. So there's so much rich work in our communities that we can do. And this is not an invitation for one or two people to do everything. It's just an invitation for us to begin to connect to each other in a very different way, ongoing. As we say in Black Voters Matter, this is 365 days kind of work. And so that's how we visualize our work. That's how we charge our staff. And that's the message we give out to the community, because we're trying to shift this vicious cycle of it's election time, now let's move. No, right? Like the pastors say at church, if you ain't already been to church before you come to church, right? Then we got a problem here. So it's the same thing with voting. You got to be in voting and in power mode all the time.
I'd have to shoot you some hearts and likes on that one, because when you mentioned the fact that people seem to only want to get charged up around election time, that's very frustrating to me, because you should be upset and angry about these injustices all the time and be working towards it, versus speaking up, waiting until all of the candidates it's down to like two, and then now they want to speak up and say something about who we have to choose from. It's like, well, no, we could have been working on that all along.
And it's hard to do. Like I was saying, it's not an easy thing to do. Like sometimes people say voting and political and activist engagement are for folks who got money and resources and time, which everybody really doesn't have. And the other thing is, I don't know about you, but it's hard sometimes to sit in the space of constantly being aware of what's being done to us, right? And so we need reprieve. We need reprieve within those 365 days. And so what we say is that our mission is to do two things: is to spread love and to build power, right? And so what we hope is that within that 365, that the majority of what you're doing, the majority of your work is love-based, right? It still can have the same outcome of bringing change to your community, but let it be love based, right? So that when you go to meetings, it's not always to just say, I'm going to, I'm going to oppose this measure, right? Or I'm going to stand up, but it's also because I love my community, right? And I want to be a part. And I'm going to come to this meeting because my brothers and sisters, my community, they can't come because they're working right now. They work at a factory. They don't have the hours that they can. So I'm coming because I love them. And then when I leave here, I'm going to find a way to communicate what's happening to them. And so Black Voters Matter wants to partner with you in this love struggle, right? As we build power, because love, and it's not the anemic, like Martin says, it's not the anemic kind of love, right? Because love without power is anemic, but power without love is reckless and abusive. And we've seen a whole lot of that kind of power in America, just as much as we've seen a whole lot of anemic love, right? And so, like Martin would tell us, we need to find that perfect balance of that. And if we could find that sweet spot, then that can be our beacon of light, guiding on how we do this work, so that so it's sustainable. Because otherwise, it's hard to do. It's hard to stay in 365, but we're trying to find that love spot.
Right. So we're going to spread love so that we can gain some power. Both of those two. Did I get that right?
Yes. Gotta have
Okay.
it. Gotta have it.
Looks like we have another question from the audience. This one is from Lily Johnson. She says, do you know of any current federal or state laws to help settlement communities regarding their loss of land due to heirs property?
I know that's happening. That's happening a lot in South Carolina. And I believe in some areas in Georgia, even, we're struggling and dealing with those issues. I do believe that there are efforts, I know that there are efforts to get that land back. One of the things that I did when I first became an attorney I was a part of, it's not always popular. I never know if it's going to be loved or not, but I was a part of the Black farmers lawsuit in the Pickford versus the United States when I first became a lawyer. And I did that because I wanted to be a part of a process where land was being restored, to Black people. And I do remember that in that time period, a lot of folks, in settlements were dealing with this very, very issue. And I know people in South Carolina, and in Georgia organizing around this issue right now. And there is not the national federal support to support that effort, but it is not going on deaf ears. Black Voters Matter is absolutely, on board with trying to work with people who are trying to, get land rights restored. So no, it's not a lot of federal laws or state law for that matter to support that for obvious reasons. But that's why, when I just want to ring the bell of reparations all the time, because that's a part of that. And how we structure our demand for reparations in this country should absolutely include that.
Definitely. So now going back to the topic of voting for a hot second here, just to kind of educate people a little about who draws the district lines for voting and how much influence do we have over that process? And because it seems to really affect minority communities.
Yeah, absolutely. And it affects minority communities because we don't have power in that section. We don't really, the way that the Constitution is written up or federal laws are written up, that power is given to and I think in 25 states, the state legislatures have that power. And unfortunately, most of these legislatures, but for a few states, actually are predominantly red. They have, some of these states almost have supermajority status, in these local state houses. And so, every 10 years after the census is completed, states are charged with drawing lines, allegedly, right, to account for the change of population. And based on what the census data will say, then they get to draw lines. And sometimes that means removing congressional lines and adding congressional lines. Municipalities also have that power, right? Many states empower municipal governments the opportunity to draw lines as well to determine, where your political electoral lines will be. And so, to the extent that the census, right, which is supposed to be the controlling data that feeds these local state houses in making the decision, right, it can be impactful to our community because, communities, we know that when at the end of the census last year, the numbers were not as high for participation in our communities as people would like them to be. But I absolutely understand that in this country, this government has had a history of abusing our community. So, so when Black folks say, I don't trust giving folk my information, I absolutely understand it because America has not quite demonstrated that they're going to do right by us with information. So unfortunately, though, that also means that, it handicaps us sometimes in the redistricting process, and it breeds gerrymandering where you empower these state houses and state reps who mean us no good, right, to be able to draw lines in a way that dissolve or dilute our power as voters. And what I mean by that is they pack us up to make sure that instead of being able to elect maybe 2 people or 3 people, we only can elect 1 person. And then they make us a minority, right, in other districts so that we won't be able to make a decision about who represents us in that as well. So, sadly, we're very limited as it relates to redistricting. It's a very oppressive process. We have to fight for ways to gain power and representation beyond what America has told us and defined for us, right? And we have to begin to, Latasha, who is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter, she always says that we have to reimagine the nation that we want, and then we have to pursue that, right? And so it's really hard talking about the laws of America because the laws of America were not created with us in mind. There were only a few laws that were done, and we fought for that with blood. But other laws just were not meant to give us power and representation. And so, the United States Declaration of Independence, one of my favorite parts of that document is not the part that talks about you being granted, with the God-given rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I mean, we all know that, right? As Black folks, we know that. But there's another sentence that follows that says that, when the government ceases to do these things, i.e. provide life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to abolish it and create something new, right? It says it is the right of the people to abolish it and create something new. And so in that spirit of abolition, we have to begin to think about stuff like the census, feeding the redistricting. And we have to say to ourselves, that's not benefiting our community. What other way, what new way can we design and advocate for and fight for in this country to allow for a marginalized or minority community, right, to still have power and representation and in voice? And so, unfortunately, we aren't having those discussions. We keep thinking about how can we fight folk who don't want to give us power by looking at their system and what they've defined and trying to just get more folks to fill out the census form, right? And that's fine. That's one avenue. We certainly can do that. But we do, as a people, need to start thinking about what other ways can we gain power as a minority group in this nation. And so I'm welcoming, I'm not saying I have the answer for that. I got some ideas, but I don't necessarily want to turn the conversation there because that's a long talk. But I do want to take the opportunity to say that we have to know that we have the right to engineer and be architects of the kind of laws that we want in this country. And they're not going to always look like the ones that are on the books because they were not meant with us in mind.
Right. Looks like we've got another question from Michael Wallace. He wants to know, how does allyship serve the March for Community Power?
Allyship, I'm not sure. Do you mean like allies? Like
I'm
people that
guessing
we work with? An
ally.
ally,
Yeah.
right.
Okay. So it came in wrong.
Right. So how does allies, and what was the ending of that question?
How does it serve the March for Community Power?
Allies have always been a part, of the structure, for helping to bring change. And I mentioned that earlier when I talked about what's that formula, right? And one of the things was, making sure that we have allies that are aligned with our needs. Brother Malcolm said in one of his quotes, and it's one of my favorite quotes, he talked about this question of allyship, right? And he said, allies, we don't need the kind of allies to just tell us to be quiet and to be nonviolent. John Brown? Ask them if they know John Brown. You know what John Brown did? He started a revolution. And he talked about that because he used John Brown, for example, in that quote, because John Brown historically was someone who was a strong abolitionist, right? And he engaged in a war or created a rebellion because he believed that the white power structure at that time was not going to end slavery nicely. So he felt like, in the same way that Nat Turner felt and Denmark Vesey felt, that they needed to go to other measures to stop this evil from occurring, in this country. And so what he did in that quote is not to suggest that we need to be finding folks who want to go and create a rebellion, right? Or maybe, what he was trying to suggest is, whoever your ally is going to be, that's going to be a part of creating a space for you to become liberated, must be people who understand and are honest about this country, right? The truth behind its treatment to African people, and Black folks and other marginalized people, that there's systemic racism that is wreaked in every brick in the institutions created in this country, and that they're willing to take that truth and join you in carrying it down, right? And those are the kind of allies that will help us get towards liberation, get towards the freedom and the vision that we want. We can't have, it's like some people that Mark described when he was in the Birmingham jail. We can't have those people, right, who sit by and say nothing and act as if, like we heard these past couple of months, when they saw Trump and others trying to tear down the Capitol, and they said to themselves, wow, right? I've never seen America so divided. And Black folks were sitting back saying, you mean that time when there were 2 water fountains? What are you talking about? You haven't seen America so divided, right? So we have to be clear that our allies are people who fundamentally are aware, admit, and accept the racist structures in this country and will help us fight that. And then we can join them and help them too.
Awesome. I'm speechless because I know exactly what you mean. It's like, are you serious? All this stuff that's been going on around us. And this right here is the thing that puts you over the top to say,
Right.
oh my gosh, if I had pearls on, I'd clutch them right now.
Right.
Let's see, we've got 3 more questions. Let's try to squeeze them in before we wrap things up. The first one is from Adrienne Simpson Brown. She wants to know, should organizations working for progress pay attention to the aftermath of the census, looking out for gerrymandering? If so, how do we combat it? Or does it come down to who we elect?
It's certainly who you elect is a part of that, right? Because that person or persons will be in the room making the decisions. And what we recommend for people is that as their deadlines have shifted and changed for many states because of the issues that involved the census last year. And so, one, be on alert for when the census data is due to be used in your state. Find that out now. That's very easy to research in Google to find out when the census data will be completed and then submitted for consideration to your state houses, then you must go to those committee meetings, right? And you need to create an organization or work with a community of people. There are a lot of organizations already, including my organization, that are already, going to meetings and making sure that we are in alignment, knowing what's being suggested and offered and published, because they have to do that. They have to talk about that in a committee. They have to draw the lines, demonstrate the justification for it, and the data that they relied on. And we have to be a part of that process because it is going to be made available to the public. We have to review it. We have to challenge it. We have to attend those sessions, and we have to say that they are wrong. And there are also a lot of organizations, legal organizations like the Legal Defense Fund, ACLU, Southern Poverty Law Center in the state of Alabama, and also in other places, that will be filing lawsuits when we get some of those lines to challenge the issue of gerrymandering. But even as just a citizen of somebody living, you can find out by being informed. One of the things that Black Voters Matter is going to be doing is making sure that in our states that we work in, that we are going to be providing information about this process to make sure that all of us are aware of what's happening. But the best thing we can do right now is to know when that data will be completed and relied upon by the State House, and then be present as they're developing in these committee meetings before they get voted on.
And so that right there kind of speaks to one of the remaining questions. It was, can you talk? It was from Warren Jones, asking if you can talk about how important it is to write or call our elected officials on key issues that affect our communities.
It absolutely is. I mean, people don't think, but I talked about the power. There's like the bang power, like explosive, but there's also that drip, 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 drip power that also can also break concrete, right? And so calling your representatives, and not just your national representatives, but your city council people, your county commissioner people, your state house people, all your board of education people, all of these folks are people you should be calling. Your sheriff, right? Your DAs, your representatives. Those are those little drips. Because if they know that you always gonna show up, that you always gonna be there, that you're gonna call them until they get it right, just like that little drip can break concrete, those little calls can help to bring an avalanche of change. So I encourage everyone, know your folk, right? Know who represents you. Know who has their hands on your purse. Know who has their hands on your property, your privacy, all of those rights that you have in this country. And yes, we better call them. So I absolutely agree. It's vital. It is one of the most underused means of power that we have at our disposal. And you ain't got to have a lot of money to make them phone calls.
No, actually, I know there are a lot of apps out there that if you put in your information as far as your district, it'll tell you who your representatives are, and it'll give you a script and everything. And so it's not complicated at all. So as a matter of fact, in the information below this recording, we'll add in some of those links as well. If anybody out there is interested in knowing like what are some of these other apps and ways that you can do this without having to do as much hunting for numbers and addresses and everything, because they pretty much spell it out for you and they say, just push a button and it'll call them,
Absolutely.
So let's see. The other question is from Derek Evans. He wants to know, do you think that the government uses our mistrust of them, or that other people use that mistrust to flood our community with information, or misinformation, with everything from voting to taking the vaccine?
Absolutely. And I understand why our community is distrustful. Let me say that. That's not even conspiracy theory. They have done, from Tuskegee experiment, and all those. I get why we are concerned. But absolutely, we know that the government, through COINTELPRO and other mechanisms, have had a history of infiltrating our community with bad information to make us act or not act, right? One or the other. So that is why we have to create our own underground railroad system of information, right? Because Black folks trusted that underground railroad. They didn't even know folk when they left they house down in South Carolina, and they were told to go to the next place, to the next place. They didn't know those people, but they trusted that infrastructure because it was ours, and and there was evidence that it led towards liberation. So we have to do the same thing. We have to create our own system of letting and advising and trusting our doctors that are created by our doctors who are brilliant, that are created by our lawyers who are brilliant, our teachers, our educators, our scientists. We have enough people that we can create our infrastructure of information to start putting in our community so that we know what we should do. So yes, they do, but there's an answer for that, and it's us.
Well, it is amazing how time has just flown by. I feel like we could talk on this for
Mhm.
another week or so, just continue the conversation. So let me go ahead and start to wrap things up here. Let me start by saying thank you, April, for taking time out of your busy schedule to enlighten us on how we can mobilize and build a better community, a powerful community by sharing that love that you said we got to have the love and in order to get the power
And can
through.
I say we got to have faith? I don't
Oh,
ever want to
definite.
leave a talk by not talking about faith. I don't, for me, I have what I use for my faith, but our people have always used our faith, our belief that there's a power greater than us that is going to guide us to the place that we're trying to go. So I pray that even as we talk about the pragmatic ways to gain liberation, that we understand that our quest for liberation is a righteous one that is ordained and anointed by our Creator, by whatever name you call him or her. I don't want to leave any place that I go and not say that, because we need both of those. Our brilliance as a people, right? But also our faith, right? Those two things together are unstoppable with any agenda or plans that we have.
Definitely, definitely. So now another thing that we don't want you to leave without saying is how can people reach you and your organization? Should they have further questions or maybe a desire to donate to the cause? Do you have an email list that people can sign up so that they can remain up to date on what's going on in Black Voters Matter?
All they have to do is just go to Black Voters Matter Fund. If you just Google it, a couple of things are going to come up. Our Twitter is going to come up, our Facebook is going to come up, and our Instagram. And we are very active. And so if you just go on to that and those links, you will easily find us, and you will also stay connected to what we're doing. And there's also information on those websites and those different pages to help you connect to us in other ways. And again, that's Black Voters Matter Fund. What's right behind me? Black Voters Matter, right? You see this image, that's us. And all you have to do is Google it.
Okay, now, and one other thing I meant to ask, how many different locations are you all in?
We are in 10 states, growing to 12. We're in Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Alabama. We're in Louisiana. We're in Tennessee. We are in South Carolina, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and we're growing into Texas. We've done some work in Texas, but we're actually going to really, really put some roots down right now. So those are the places that we do work in. But we also work with folk in other places too. We've worked with partners in Kentucky. We've worked with partners in Wisconsin, in Missouri. Wherever there's Black folks and there's a need and there's something going on, we want to be a part of that. So, but yes, we have staff in those places that, and we're growing staff in the places that I identified.
Right. Okay. So if any of you out there are watching and this is moving you to want to actually get involved, join up, then if you're in one of those places, by all means, go ahead. And even if you're not, it doesn't mean you can't still follow them and still do what you can in your little area. And who knows, you may be adding to that almost 12 number,
Yeah,
maybe
right.
next year, this time, it'll
Mhm.
be twice that, who knows?
Mhm.
So just to reiterate, that website is Black Voters Matter Fund, FUND.org, correct?
Mhm.
.org,
Yes.
okay. And so, wow, this has been an awesome hour. April, once again, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to
Mhm.
come and talk to us and enlighten us on
Thank
all
you.
these different topics here. And I'd like to send a thank you out to the Agents of Change for setting up this event, as well as affording me the opportunity to host tonight. And last but surely not least, I want to say thank you to the audience for tuning in and taking part in this discussion. I thank you for the questions that you submitted, and I hope that everybody is able to take something away from tonight's event. But when you do walk away from here, whatever you do, do not let the conversation stop here. Continue to do your research, learn, grow, share, because although we may have come a long way, we've still got a ways to go.
Mm.
Any closing words, April, before we sign off?
No, just love is all we need. Not that anemic love, right? But love that also is reaped in power. So with that, we can do it.
There you go. And with that, I say good night, everyone. Thank you again.